Our journey today moves as part of your guys' journey in discipleship, and it starts off with verse 1 of Matthew chapter 17. So, just to get into the word, and um, we move from Matthew verse 1 of Matthew chapter 17 and move towards verse 8. So, Matthew chapter 17, if you needed a topic, it's the Mount of Discipleship, would be the title. But we're just moving between verses 1 and 8, and this is what verse 8 says. So just go straight to the destination, so to speak. And it says, when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no man but Jesus. When they lifted up their eyes, they saw no man but Jesus. Now, I firmly believe that God's desire is that after all the drama of life, we all come to the place where when we lift up our eyes, we see no one but Jesus Christ alone. No one else. Because only He has sacrificed His life for us. So while most times God gives us things and people to help us in the journey of life, and sometimes He takes things and people away, so that we all come to that one point when we lift up our eyes, we rely on no one but Jesus. If I were to kind of summarize my experience as a pastor, it's not too long. If I were to share my experiences as a disciple of Jesus, this would be it. This will be it. It's all about Jesus. Discipleship is all about making Jesus the central person in your life. So if there's a Moses, he must go. If there's an Elijah, bye. So that when we lift up our eyes, we are seeing no man but Jesus. I believe that that's discipleship 101 kind of thing. And that's what your guys' theme is about on discipleship. Discipleship is when we help others to follow Christ exclusively, not necessarily through church, not necessarily through all the other stuff that surrounds us. So let's go into the story. Let's get into the story. So Matthew chapter 17 and verse 1 will read, "Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured right before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light." And so the story, after 6 days, and as good Bible students who I know you are, the question is, 6 days after what? 6 days after what exactly? Does Jesus take, Peter, James, and John? Well, 6 days after Jesus told the disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer and be killed, but on the third day, he told them that after all the drama, after the third day, they would lift up their eyes and they would see Jesus alive again. That's Matthew 16. So just the chapter before this one, in in chapter 17, the chapter just before. 6 days after what? 6 days after Jesus told Peter of the guys with him on this mountain climbing experience. He told Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Oops. 6 days after he tells them that. "You are an offense to me," he says, "for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of man." You're not seeing the bigger picture. 6 days after Jesus told Peter, James, and John and their friends that if you want to become my disciples, and that's from verse 24 of the chapter just before, he told them, if you want to become my disciples, if you want to become my followers, deny yourself, take up the cross, and follow me. If you want to save your life, you will lose it. But if you want to lose your life for Christ's sake, you will find it. So 6 days before the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus told the disciples to deny themselves, to take up their crosses, follow him, and that there was no way they could run from suffering without running from him. And we had this little discussion during Sabbath school about the role of suffering, and I love the comments that came through there. So in other words, Jesus was saying, if you want to be my disciples, let me take center stage in your life and lead. I don't know about you guys, but I love the driving seat. I like to be in charge. And so God sent me to Scotland, where the first thing I was reminded is you are, I need to find the right words here. You're not in charge. That was a good lesson for me. I love to tell the story. I had this story that it was actually just an illustration. It didn't actually happen, where I get up and go on the stage and I say, in our house, in my house, my wife has the last say. And it sounds so cool and like, what? Your wife has the last say? Yo, you need to be in this organization that Sophie is working in. You actually understand this thing, this new job Sophie was telling us about, and women's rights and understanding other people. So if we were talking about finances and disciplining the children or buying a car, my wife has the last say. And just when everybody is happy, and then I tell the people and I say, she always says, yes, sir. And all the people are like, what? That's terrible, But it's only an illustration. But and my wife, please don't repeat that to her, please, because that would be just the end of the marriage, the end of ministry, and she's not one of those guys who just submits to anything, But here's the point. It's flattering to be known to have the last say. It's so flattering. It's flattering to be on the driving seat of making decisions, It's part of the sin problem. It's part of our pursuit for self-interest. And sadly, we take such pursuits into courtship, and we take it into marriage, Our desire to be in charge, to win victories, to win arguments and confrontations. Hey, I'm in charge. I won, And so Jesus is trying to detox that. I was saying I love to be in the driving seat, but I'm always reminded in the marriage that I'm not. My wife just forget being pastor here. This is not the church. Let's just finish that off here, So God has a huge agenda to help me to learn that I can't do it, I live 30 minutes away from the church. So the church in Aberdeen, the main church. And I don't know how many times I've slept driving home from church, just dozing off in the car. I'm one of those drivers, sadly, I'm not even sure if that's a safe thing to share. But hey, that's the truth, I doze off behind the wheel. And I wouldn't trust my life with a driver who sleeps behind the wheel. But guess what? I still love the driving seat. I wouldn't even trust my own life with me if I was like in the back seat, So those are the lessons that we just want to go through today. Stop trying to save yourself. Those are the lessons at the foot of the mountain before we even climb. We're taken into the 6 days before that and everything that's happened in, So Jesus is saying, let me lead and stop trying to save yourself. Years ago, actually when I was at Newbold, Jonathan was my senior, and I'm not ashamed of saying that, I may be older in years, but he was my senior, and a good senior at that. And so I attended a first aid course. I was one of the night deans at some point. And so it was one of those boring courses, sorry to say, but I don't like the compulsory training that you always have to do. But it's good. It's good. You have to do it. So there am I attending this training, and then the guy was one of those nice speakers with monotone and yeah, just made me sleep. And so there, my dozing off, nothing new. And he then comes up with the following statistic. He says 90% of people in the UK who choke and die in a toilet, in a restaurant. 90% of people in the UK who choke and die, 90% of that happens in a restaurant. Probably that will all be different now with lockdown and everything. But they are determined to save themselves, determined to not to be embarrassed. So they stand up from the table for good British etiquette. So they stand up, there's something that's blocking their airway. They start coughing a bit, and they stand, they move away from the people. And they go to the bathroom, to the restroom. And there they meet their fate. Those four walls are the last thing that just surrounds them. They move away from the people. Then the guy goes on to show us, the test and, not the test, the maneuver that you do when someone is, and how it always needs somebody to be there. You need someone to help you to avoid choking and dying. But we move away from the very people. 90%. And I'm thinking, he was reminding us of the importance of just this maneuver happening with people around you and realizing that you cannot do it on your own, full stop, kind of thing. And so this is what we are trying to go into today. So there's a beautiful scenery at the foot of this mountain as Jesus leads Peter, James, and John up the mountain. All three of them from Matthew chapter 4. If you read in Matthew chapter 4 before verse 18 onwards, they have been following Jesus, but now and again these guys have been struggling with wanting to take the driving seat. James and John, the Bible tells us that their mother, let's just say it was their mother, who wants them to sit one on the right-hand side and one on the left-hand side of Jesus in the kingdom. They are there at the foot of the cross. And then there's Peter, who always wants to take the driving seat. And they left their boats, these guys, and their families, and started following. But yes, they are tempted, like we all are, to be in charge. So early into our climbing lesson here is a reminder that discipleship is following Jesus. If you're climbing and you lift up your head, you see the leader. Following the way he does the things, and be familiar with his ways, and be familiar with the Bible, and not just as a tick box exercise, but studying God's word to really want to know. I want this guy to be the leader. I want him to take charge. If he leads in the valley, he leads in the valley. There we go. If it's a mountain, we go to the mountain. Wherever he leads, we follow. So disciples follow. And discipleship involves following. And they were called disciples, but they were different. All the guys there were different. Those three that he takes up there were different. The diversity they each bring is balanced by their unity towards the one that they were following. So it's okay to be different. It's okay to be different as long as they had this one common person that they were all following. It becomes okay. They're at once different and all at once the same in that they were followers of Christ. There is a unity in their diversity that's to be celebrated and not taken for granted, because only when we do that we appreciate that it's okay to be different, when we celebrate the differences. So Peter is different from James and John, and we want to take that on board to say, let's just follow Jesus in our diversity. and enjoy it and let it become a blessing. So they were testifying to the fact that there's only one name given to man by which we must be saved, which is the name of Jesus. Then they finally get to the top, and this is where things begin to happen. They finally get to the top, and Jesus gets transfigured and glorified. You know, none of them gets this glorious look. Only Jesus does. Only Jesus gets the glorious look. And hopefully the disciples get another lesson from that all the glory belongs to him and him alone. And then Moses, Elijah do that sci-fi scene, you know, and they appear and they're talking to Jesus. Then Peter wants to take a selfie. Peter wants to take a selfie. He wanted to freeze the moment and make it permanent. He says, let's build. Let's build right here on top of the mountain. You find that in the verses that follow. Peter says that in verse 4. Let's build. And nobody actually answers Peter. Peter, one of those, swiftly moving on. Then God joins the mountaintop experience. At least he, in his audible version, he joins the mountaintop experience and he makes it known that this is my beloved son whom I am well pleased in. Listen to him. And so the disciples fall on their faces and are greatly afraid. And then verse 8 comes and says, when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no man but Jesus. You see, Moses and Elijah were gone. And I believe there's something important there. It is common for me, when I'm facing the challenges of life and of serving God, to remember my mom and my grandma foremost. So when I'm in trouble, guys, I remember my mom and my grandma foremost. Those two. But sadly, both of them have passed away. So now if there's an issue to pray on or something that's bothering me, something that's affecting me in the ministry, I have my mentor and my aunt who's in Zambia. And I usually call on these people. Of course, there's my wife too. But, I made a mistake earlier on in the marriage that I actually told my wife that, sometimes I believe God speaks to me through you. Oh, that was the end of it. I was like, okay. Now, if there's anything that happens and we're disagreeing, she'll be like, you remember that sometimes God speaks to you through me? And so I need to, put all that in perspective, So it so happens that my mentor travels a lot. And my aunt, sometimes her phone is not, it doesn't kind of like WhatsApp, one of those phones that don't like WhatsApp. And so I can't access the people that that I think of that I would love to. And I've already told you that my mother, who was my rock, and my grandmother, who was also my rock, they've since passed on. And I've told you the situation with my mentor and my aunt. And it so happens that in the midst of all these things, I feel like lost because I don't have someone to call on. So the dead are dead. I can't pray with them, and the living are not always around to support me. So I'm roast. I'm done. I'm disconnected. Or maybe not. Maybe that's exactly where Jesus wants me and you. You see, Moses represents the dead who will be resurrected to see Jesus, as we would say, as good Adventist theology would say. Elijah represents those who never tasted death, carried away in a chariot, as you may recall the story. If not, First Kings will give it to you so lovely. Elijah represents those righteous alive when Jesus comes. Oh, how I wish my mom were here at times. How I wish my mentor was always there to say, what have you learned from this experience, as he does in such a beautiful way. How I wish I could always go back to that park in Bulawayo, the city of my birth, and sit on that chair where God did mighty and marvelous things for me, but I'm now removed from that situation. Or that I wish I could go to Sutton Park in Birmingham, where I first received the call to ministry, and sit on that chair as well that I made my prayer spot, but I'm removed from that situation. And so one by one, God seems to move the things that that I kind of now depend on, or the places I wish I could be in that place, in that seat that I loved in Newbold, where I would go. And I even took my mom when she came visiting at Newbold, and we sat there in Sylvia's garden, and we just had a lovely time. But I'm not in Newbold anymore. So one by one, God seems to remove these things. It looks like God has taken away some people in my life and some things in my life, so that when I lift up my eyes, I see no man but Jesus. I see no man but Jesus. Loss of friendships, loss of control, loss of earnings, loss of health, a loss of loved ones. Any loss forms us, any loss forms us. It leaves us with a clearer perspective of life, and the most important aspects of life, a clearer picture of Jesus. So God may strip away all human support you want until you recognize that it's all about Christ, and that process is called discipleship. I believe that. When one by one things are removed from you, to realize maybe the job situation goes, there's a change there, so that we all come to the reckoning that it's all about Jesus. And I believe this is what happened on the mountain. The next verse says it all. When they lifted up their eyes, they saw no man but Jesus. So I was moving to Aberdeen, to the district, and some people told me, to stay in control as a pastor, there's some guys who say that, you have to do this and this and this and that, and this guy will help you. And within 3 months of getting here, the guy comes to me and says, my wife has found a job in Wales, so I need to move. So the guy moves to Wales. And then someone else says, oh, no, this other person will help you in your ministry as a young pastor. And guess what? Within a few years, it was just a year or two, that guy had to stop. And then there was someone else. That guy comes to me and says, so-and-so will be your rock. They will be there for you. And one by one, all these guys move away. And so at one point, when I was really feeling it, I had this experience where I sat out there and I thought, wow, one by one, these people have been removed from me. And that's when it dawned to me. And I went to the book Desire of Ages, the chapter He was transfigured, the very last passage. And that's where this message was born. In the midst of that conflict, in the midst of that crisis, the Lord just helped me to realize what the disciples also experienced, that when they finally lifted up their eyes, God wanted them not to see the guru Moses. God didn't want them to see Elijah, didn't want them to see anybody on whom they would hang all their hopes and future on. So excuse me, Moses, excuse me, Elijah, I must see Jesus. After all, it's all about Jesus. Why is it all about Jesus? Because it takes God to access God. It takes God to access God. We don't need other gurus. Nothing about Moses and those loved ones that have rested. Nothing about Elijah and those loved ones who haven't tasted death and the living righteous. They did a great and glorious things, but God didn't want Moses to be worshipped. God didn't want Elijah to be the central thing. It takes God to access God. There's no other name. So step aside Moses, step aside Elijah, step aside Pastor Jackson, the president of the NEC, step aside Ian Sweeney, step aside Rafat, Ted Wilson, Ellen White, whoever it is that may be taking a center stage. I love them all. Each of them have a huge place in my discipleship journey, but none of them have died for me. None of them have died for me. None of them are planning to do that. So there's only Jesus, the begotten, beloved Son of God. The next verse after all that says, when they opened their eyes, when they lifted their eyes, they saw no man but Jesus. My prayer is that we will not put anybody and hang all our life and our experience and in the process of discipleship, when we are learning to follow Jesus and put him central, it should really be about that and nothing more. May God lead you to that steep mountain, because it's easy said than done. I told you about my problems with driving, and then I sleep, and then I follow, but I still want to be in the driving seat. Sometimes I leave a matter to God, like I did 2 weeks ago. It was an intense issue, and I just left it at the feet of God. And I said, Lord, if you come through for me on this one, and by Sabbath afternoon, God came through. It was a huge issue, sadly not one I can easily mention. But God came through for me on that issue. And there was I on cloud nine, God has done it. God has done it. Then come Monday. I'm like, yeah, God did it. So God, you can now sit on the passenger seat, and I'll just drive for this one, because I need to enjoy this. I need to enjoy the space, and and everyone needs to see that I've maneuvered and the situation to where it is now. Very easy for us to do that. The important point there for me is that it takes God to access God. And so that means none of those guys were God. Not Moses, not Elijah. There was only one. God revealed to men in Jesus Christ. And so in the Great Commission that Jesus gives to his disciples in Matthew 28, in verse 18, he says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And then he says, go and make disciples. But the premise is first, all authority is given to him. So he's the main man. Jesus needs to be the final authority. He has the last say. He has the last word in our daily week. Jonathan D., who spoke earlier on, it's all about him. Him having the final word in your business ventures, and all our endeavors. Salvation is through God and God alone. He had one son who he gave to us, Jesus, through whom salvation comes. So the glory was reserved only for the one who is able to save. Moses couldn't save anybody, nor could Elijah. It takes God to access God. It takes Jesus and only Jesus to access God the Father. And the journey to realizing and living that out is called discipleship. And my prayer is that when you lift up your eyes, you will see no man but Jesus. May God bless you. Amen.